Here's a rare blooper from that smash hit cartoon, Pokémon.
Pikachu! Pika Pika! Pika Pee! Squirtle, Squirtle! Squirtle, Squirtle! Pika Pika! Pikachu! Pika Pika! Squirtle! Squirtle, Squirtle! What the f*** am I saying? No, I mean it! This makes no sense at all!
Say the line, Earl, or you get the gas.
For the love of kids, go read a book or something!
Japan, the land of high-speed rails, skyscraper malls, impeccable punctuality, snow monkeys, weird flavors of Kit Kat, god-tier work ethics, Panasonic TV screens, waifu pillows, Honda Civics, innocent cute things, and not so innocent cute things that would typically land you on an offender's registry.
Why don't you take a seat right over there?
We typically think of Japan as a very secular nation, arguably the most irreligious nation in the world. However, Japanese culture just doesn't fit in with our Western frameworks. What is considered religious is rather different than what we call religion. The religion in question is Shintoism. Shintoism is the indigenous religion of Japan. Like many Native American religions, as well as pre-Christian European religions, Shintoism is animistic. Animism is a form of religion in which spirits are manifest in all of nature, a spirit of the trees, the river, fire, clouds. If it's natural, it probably has a spirit. This probably doesn't apply to artificial constructs though, as I'm unaware of any Panasonic monitors or Toyota Corollas having spirits. While oftentimes considered to be a primitive form of religious beliefs compared to poly and monotheisms, animism has had more of a modern comeback as of late in the form of panpsychism, which is the belief/doctrine that everything material, however small, has a little bit of individual consciousness. If you are wondering why the hills and clouds in Nintendo's Mario games have eyes who watch you, well, now you know. Over the course of history, Shintoism merged with Buddhism, a mainland foreign import, and this created a unique syncretism. Today, the vast majority of Japanese people take part in Shintoist rituals on occasion, but only a relatively small number identify as Shintoists. People from a Christian or Muslim background would be surprised to find out that beliefs in literal spirits are actually not that important compared to the rituals themselves. Now, for those of you who haven't clicked away, you might be wondering, what the hell does this have to do with Pokémon? Well, everything actually. Pokémon is heavily influenced by the religion of Shintoism. The idea that there are supernatural objects with consciousness woven into nature ties directly into the fictional universe with fictional conscious creatures based off of nature. Ninetales is based off of fox spirits. Geodude is based off of earth spirits. Bulbasaur, Oddish, and others are basically tubers/roots with some sort of consciousness. Only a few Pokemon are clearly not inspired by nature, but rather some sort of human creation, such as Magneton. Maybe this Pokemon is based off of the spirit of a Sony assembly line. Now keep in mind that Pokemon was developed during the 1990s in Japan, a decade of economic stagnation, but cultural revival. Interest in Japanese culture in the Western world and wider world at large was nothing new, dating all the way back to the era of Portuguese contact. The post-war era saw international interest in the Godzilla franchises, and the 1980s saw the rise of the Nintendo Entertainment System. But the 90s would take Japan mania to a whole new level, as Japan was seen as a culture just as advanced as the West, yet so vastly different. The 90s were a decade of PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn, Nintendo 64, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Dragon Ball Z, Tamagotchi, and for that matter, Digimon. Digimon, aka Digital Monsters, debuted on television Japan in 1997, based off of the Tamagotchi toys. Many assumed that Digimon was a ripoff off of Pokemon, while others claimed that it was the other way around. Pokemon is actually slightly older, but neither of these claims of plagiarism stand up to scrutiny, at least not in the beginning. The concepts of each type of evolution is respectively different in the two different franchises. What is inarguable is that Pokemon became far more prominent, and unlike Digimon, became a global cultural phenomenon that has transcended decades. The creator of Pokemon, Satoshi Tajiri, of whom I'm almost certainly mispronouncing the name of, was inspired in part by Shintoism, as well as his childhood hobby of collecting bugs in his backyard. As he entered his adolescence, he grew to love arcade games, and set up Japan's first major gaming magazine, Game Freak. Unfortunately, the publication closed due to a lack of profit. However, over this journey as a part-time gaming journalist, he did manage to befriend illustrators and business moguls who would provide him with the aesthetics and capital to bring his fictional animistic world to life. He would assemble a team to create a video game company under the same name as the now defunct magazine, alongside another company called Creatures Inc., which shared the same office building as another company you might have heard of called Nintendo. The first game the company produced was a puzzle video game by the name of Mendel's Palace, which was released on the Nintendo Entertainment System, with a respectable, albeit mild, success. Around this time, Nintendo was focusing on handheld gaming, namely through the original Game Boy, which was released back in 1989. Handheld gaming devices were nothing new, but the Game Boy was unique in the sense that they could be connected through the Game Boy cable. This had been used for multiplayer games, similar to a console with multiple controllers, but it could also be used for data transfers. This was used to play games like Asteroids with 2 players, but also to share items, such as the game Dragon Quest II. At the time, these handheld gaming devices were always seen as secondary to the non-portable consoles for obvious reasons. The games were clearly less visually impressive. This would all change when Tajiri combined the concept of collecting animal specimens, Shintoism, and data transfers into Pokémon Red and Green. Now this brings us to the concept of rarity. Things that are rare are in short supply and high demand. Adam Smith, the father of economics, told us so. Throughout history, the concept of rarity produced a deep sense of desire, not because having these items was essential, but oftentimes because they were seen as a status symbol. In economics, there is the diamond-water paradox. Water is extremely important, a necessity, but it's common and in most cases is easy and cheap to access. It's not a status symbol. Diamonds are nowhere near as important as water, but they are in many ways far more valuable due to their rarity and beauty. Even though most people who possess them do so just to produce or project status rather than for practical matters. If this paradox didn't exist, we would all die as water would be too expensive, and we'd just be dying from thirst while we're covered in fancy jewelry. Iron is more common and more functional than gold, but far cheaper, and of less status. The varying rarity of items throughout history, such as diamonds, gold, purple dye, pearls, and other objects, made them coveted by the rich and powerful, who usually got them, as well as the far more common poor and powerless people who yearned for these items yet never achieved to attain them. In Pokemon, you would have very common boring creatures like Pidgeot, or this one that looks like a mouse. Rats and pigeons are not quite as interesting as, say, dragons, which don't exist. And the game Dragonite was a very rare Pokemon and therefore highly coveted. Repetition and commonality are boring, rarity and novelty are fascinating. The Taj Mahal is the Taj Mahal, meaning that there's only one of them. This singular spectacle makes it a coveted vacation destination. Meanwhile, there are nearly 32,000 KFC locations around the world. Going back to the water diamond paradox, KFC is more functional, but no one picks a KFC restaurant as their vacation destination, unless they're a basement-dwelling neckbeard. The same thing goes for Pokemon. Some are very common, and every player has them, but others are very rare and coveted. After all, the tagline of the franchise was Catching this stupid little caterpillar thing is easy. Catching an electric falcon creature was hard. As a child, I remember getting pissed off, walking in a cave and encountering annoying bats, but I was thrilled when I managed to catch the rare Articuno. While the common Pokemon were common on both the Pokemon Red and Green in Japan, certain more rare Pokemon were only found on one or the other, requiring a player to either A, purchase both games, or B, have a friend who could exchange Pokemon through the cable. For example, Ekans and Mankey were only on the red, however, Magmar was only on the green. Keep in mind that the Japanese release was obviously earlier than the North American and European releases, coming out in 1996. Now, if you're in the US or Europe or anywhere else outside of Japan, you might be confused as to why I'm referring to Pokémon Green. This is because outside of Japan, they released Pokémon Blue instead of Green. Blue fixed the bugs in Green. On top of that, the colors of green and blue in Japan are oftentimes seen as shades of the same color, similar to the rarely used term and color teal in the English language. Pokémon Red and Green were released in 1998. With the new and improved Pokémon Blue replacing Green, making its debut on the international market in 1999. They were a colossal hit in spite of the original Game Boy being nearly a decade old. The handheld device ensured that the game was cheaper than your typical console game, and the cable allowed kids and adults to exchange Pokémon, making it a social experience. In any country with enough wealth to have access to video games and television, kids got to play Pokémon. This wasn't just relegated to North America, Europe, and East Asia. I had cousins in my ancestral homeland, Lebanon, who played the game as children and watched the show. Speaking of the show, the anime would debut in 1997 in Japan. The main character was Ash Ketchum, and he was seeking to catch 'em all. Get it? Ash Ketchum, catch 'em all. It's still funnier than Carlos Mencia. Ash seeks to catch all the Pokemon under the guise of Professor Oak, who gives him Pikachu as his first Pokemon. In the games Red, Blue, and Green, you get the choice between the Water-type Pokemon, Squirtle, the Grass-type Pokemon, Bulbasaur, or the Fire-type Pokemon, Charmander. But in the show, Ash got the Electric-type Pokemon, Pikachu, who proved to be the most iconic of any Pokemon and turned out to be one of the most iconic pop culture characters in modern history. Humans are wired to release the chemical oxytocin when we see things which are cute. What makes something cute oftentimes involves having large eyes in proportion to the head and having a large head in proportion to their body. This is most likely an evolutionary adaptation for adults to become attached to babies, given that they have large heads in proportion to their bodies. This can be applied to other animals such as kittens, puppies, and even hermit crabs. It can also be applied to fictional characters like Mickey Mouse. At this point, Japan had already mastered the art of cuteness, or kawaii, which I'm mispronouncing, with Hello Kitty, Hamtaro, and Kirby. On top of that, Pikachu, an electric mouse creature, was also yellow and black. Yellow and black have high contrast compared to other color combinations, as they usually exude danger, which makes sense since he was an electric type Pokemon. Hence why wasps and stinging bees tend to have these colors. They are warning signs. This combination of cuteness and danger proved to be very compelling, turning Pikachu into the 1990s most iconic yellow guy character, only perhaps rivaled by Bart Simpson and later SpongeBob. Yellow is bright, which catches attention, hence why it's frequently used in marketing, particularly for children. And this yellow mouse became such a hit on the show that it inspired the creation of Pokémon Yellow. Meanwhile, the show continued to do well, as Ash, Pikachu, along with the first two gym bosses by the names of Brock and Misty, travel the fictional world in search of catching them all. By the way, for some reason Brock always looks like he has his eyes closed, which makes me wonder how he manages to goon over so many girls in the show. Gooning usually requires visual stimulation. But this is a PG show, so thankfully we never got to see Brock bang Misty, or Snorlax for that matter. The journey, companionship, and goal orientation of the games and show made them compelling to young millennials and later Zoomers, even as these generations were coming of age. This leads us to the subject of Pokemania. From 1998 to 2000, Pokemon became an absolute obsession for young millennials, an obsession which resonated with both boys and girls in a variety of formats, first with the games, then with the show, then with the movies. The first movie was, you guessed it, Pokémon the first movie. Yes, you heard me, Pokémon the first movie. Just the title alone lets you know that they were determined to milk and shill this franchise till the end of an epoch. Going back to the subject of rarity, the first movie was all about the rarest of the rare original Pokemon, Mew and Mewtwo. Some praised the movie for covering some controversial subjects such as genetic engineering. After all, the 90s were the decade of Dolly the cloned sheep and the widespread use of GMOs in agriculture. But unlike a movie about genetic engineering like Gattaca, which actually had some serious conversations to be had regarding bioethics, the first Pokemon movie was not some intellectual thought experiment, but rather a gimmick to sell tickets and popcorn to children who were too dumb to realize just how terrible the movie was. I remember loving it as a child, only to watch it as an adult and almost get an epileptic seizure from the cringe.
Pokemon aren't meant to fight. Not like this. It's useless.
The whole point of Pokemon is to have them fight. I'd much rather have a fictional video game and cartoon series of animals fighting each other than having children set up some Michael Vick-style dogfighting ring. Various other movies were shilled out, such as Pokémon the Movie 2000 in 1999/2000, and Pokémon 3 and Pokémon Forever and Ever, and a long list of forever growing movies that by and large received poor to mixed critical reception. However, the vast majority did do very well in the box office, as children are not known for their high artistic tastes. Unlike Pixar, most of these movies were not meant to appeal to the parents, just children who nagged their parents into watching them. However, there were some more recent exceptions of fairly good Pokemon movies, such as the spin-off movie, which was mostly live action, titled Detective Pikachu, in which Pikachu is voiced by Ryan Reynolds. Yeah, Pikachu and Deadpool are played by the same guy. But let's time travel back to 1999 Pokemania. The N64 held a monopoly on the rights to the Pokémon games, which gave it the edge over Sony's PlayStation and Sega Saturn, and later the Dreamcast. The N64 would release Pokémon Stadium along with Pokémon Snap and Hey You Pikachu, among others. Pikachu and Jigglypuff were also included as characters in the original hit Super Smash Bros., in which Pikachu faces off against Mario as well as Link from Zelda, making Pokémon a canon aspect of the greater Nintendo multiverse. In 1999, Pokémon Gold and Silver would be released, adding 100 new Pokémon, and while these new additions never became as popular as the original 150, they did turn the fictional universe into one which was expansive, living and breathing. This was followed by Pokémon Crystal in 2000. The peak of Pokemania would not be through the video games though, or even the TV show and movies, but rather through cards. Trading cards were already popular in Japan and the United States. Everyone is familiar with the typical deck of cards, usually played by adults. But these were not collector's items. That would change with the rise of baseball cards, which were common collector's items in both countries, as baseball, surprisingly enough, is Japan's favorite sport. Magic the Gathering had already gained a significant following in Japan during the 1990s as well. Pokemon cards were introduced as full-fledged games, but funny enough, the game itself was not really that popular. Certain cards necessary to play the real game were oftentimes discarded by children who didn't care about the actual card game. They cared about the cards themselves as collector items, particularly the rare cards. The cards became a microeconomy for children, alongside status symbols. Everyone had a Weedle card, but not everyone had a Blastoise card. The most coveted and rarest cards of that time was the Charizard card. The obsession among children was the cause of many concern for boomer parents, who had not only spent a lot of money on these laminated pieces of paper, but also had to watch their kids fight each other over the cards. While some of this concern was legitimate, there was also an element of moral panic in some circles. In 2000, various Muslim-majority countries such as Egypt, Qatar, and others had imams who claimed that Pokemon meant "I'm Jewish" in Japanese, and that Pikachu meant "I'm a Jew." Charmander supposedly meant "Allah is weak." Apparently, Allah did not give them access to a Japanese translation to find out that Pokemon stands for pocket monsters rather than some sort of Zionist plot. Fatwas were issued against Pokemon in Saudi Arabia and Jordan, similar to the one Iran issued to Salman Rushdie's satanic verses. Both Christian and Muslim fundamentalists were also concerned over evolution in Pokemon, even though the evolution of Pokemon is much more deterministic than it is in actual biology. Another controversy which would surround Pokemon would be Jinx, who looked like a character in blackface, a form of makeup used to demean African Americans during the Jim Crow era. The Japanese cartoonists obviously were not familiar with this context, but Jinx was nonetheless changed into this, a tad bit less offensive to the American audience. While most Pokemon cards today are worthless due to how common they are, a first edition good condition Charizard card can cost anywhere between $5,000 to $15,000. However, like Beetlemania and Dinomania before it, Pokemania would subside. Manias are unsustainable in the long run. However, the intense amount of interest did create a more subtle, longer-lasting interest in the franchise in the same way it did for the Beatles. This did not happen with other fads that existed during the 90s, such as Furby or Crazy Bones, which peaked after an intense interest and then just faded off into obscurity. This time, the mania wasn't really a fad, it was a trend. Pokemania turned into Pokemon fandom. Similar to how a couple falls madly in love, and then after that intense period of passion, it subsides and the love is more sustainable. Granted, for some adult members of the fandom, having a romantic relationship might not be so relatable. Since then, countless other movies, video games, and merchandise have come and gone. Like most other very popular franchises that seem to never end, like The Simpsons, Jaws, Jurassic Park, and Indiana Jones, there was a general public perception that Pokemon lost its edge and declined in quality, mostly coasting off of the exceptional quality early on.
Little Theo, you grew up before our eyes.
Hey, Dad, how come they're taking the Cosby Show off the air?
Because Mr. Cosby wanted to stop before the quality suffered.
Quality schmality. If I had a TV show, I'd run that sucker into the ground.
Amen, boy. Amen.
Some franchises end at their peak to avoid such a fate, such as Seinfeld, while others, like Happy Days, decline in quality and just fizzle out. I mean, I like a lot of the newer Pokemon, but some of these designs are just lame. For example, there's a Pokemon named Vanillish, based off of the soft service vanilla ice cream cone. I doubt the ancient Japanese Shintoists ever communed with a spirit which manifested itself in the form of a McDonald's menu item. Pokemon, nonetheless, still continued to be popular, namely through its original handheld games. In 2016, a new Pokemania would emerge with Pokémon GO, which could be played on mobile devices. See, during the year 2000, the only games you could play on your Nokia phone were games like Snake. Technology rapidly improved over the course of a decade and a half. Pokemon GO used a freemium business model with in-app purchases and ads, similar to most mobile games. The game was groundbreaking as it popularized what is called augmented reality, in which people get to travel the real world to catch Pokemon in specific locations. You could find a Starmie on Bondi Beach or a Slowpoke next to the Burj Khalifa. Maybe the parking lot of a Costco had a Ditto, or the crack alley nearby had a Poliwhirl. Some retail locations and even places of worship reported higher sales and attendance respectively due to the higher concentrations of Pokemon near them. Meanwhile, there were also controversies around high concentrations of Pokemon in dangerous neighborhoods. In Bosnia, a country with some of the highest concentrations of landmines, Pokemon were found nearby many of these fields. The craze was so big that even Hillary Clinton mentioned the game in an attempt to get young people to vote.
I don't know who created Pokemon GO, but I'm trying to figure out how we get them to have Pokemon go to the polls.
Side note, it didn't work. While the revamp mania didn't last, it did lead to a resurgence of sales, namely for Pokemon Sun and Moon. Pokemon is no longer in the mania state it was back in 1999 or even in 2016, but is still going strong, with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet released in 2022. Given the staying power and the expanding world, Pokemon will continue to thrive as a cultural treasure, as it's gained resonance across multiple generations. In my previous 2 videos, I mentioned the Lindy effect. A Lindy effect, or the Lindy effect, is a theory that proposes that non-perishable things such as ideas or culture or books actually have life expectancies that are different than those of living things. Rather than, say, perishing from old age, the longer they've survived, the longer they will most likely survive into the future. This is the reason why we all know about the story of the Trojan War, yet nobody really cares that much about the aforementioned Crazy Bones. And if this is the case, then we can expect a lot more Pokemon to catch into the future, and perhaps Ash and Pikachu are truly immortal.